Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the SVA webinar series. I've got a really exciting topic planned for today. Some very interesting functionality from a guy who really knows what he's talking about when it comes to, building download-to-go services and what that means for the consumer and the technical challenges, et cetera, et cetera. Now, obviously, there's lots to talk about this. So, just a quick introduction, the Streaming Video Alliance. I'm Jason Tebow, the Executive Director. If you're unaware of the Alliance, we are a sort of global trade association that's really focused on educating the industry around challenges, defining solutions for those challenges, and then providing a forum for collaboration amongst all of those in the video ecosystem that can help solve those challenges. And with me today is Josh Presnell. He's the CTO of Panthera. So let me turn it over to Josh for a quick introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just sort of a little bit of background about me. The CTO at Panthera. I actually started my career doing signals intelligence and sensor integration work for the military. But about the time that we were doing some really cool things with chemical and biological defense systems, Steve Jobs got on the stage and announced the birth of the iPhone, and like instantly it was like, wow, this is going to change how people live their lives. And I started teaching myself how to play in the mobile phone environment, and that became a career change for me. I've been with Panthera for many years, almost since the beginning, and have architected the overall approach to download to go in a number of different environments, and have watched the feature go from something that was not really even heard of, or many people thought no one needed, to something that everyone has to have. So I'm very happy to be here and kind of talk about where we've been and where we're going.
Fantastic. One brief housekeeping item: we will be recording this webinar, so it's great for sending around to people that you think may appreciate the topic or be interested in the topic but can't attend the actual session we're having today. So that'll go out via email probably a little bit later today or early tomorrow. All right, let's jump into some questions. So obviously download to go is very interesting for video distributors, and obviously Netflix has adopted it, and and I'll let Josh talk to this in just a second, but Liberty Global has adopted it. There's other carriers, other MSOs, other video distributors who are either actively pursuing the functionality and technology or are considering it, because it seems that people are really interested in this kind of feature when it comes to streaming services. So Josh, maybe you can describe a little bit what Panthera does, sort of as a company, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the download to go functionality you guys have enabled for video distributors that you can talk about.
Sure. So Panthera was originally founded before the smartphone era to provide content to users in a disconnected world. When we originally launched, we were focused mostly in a partnership with Nokia on providing a constantly refreshed downloaded stream of music to devices. Now, about that time, smartphones became the new thing, and several mainstream music services launched, and Nokia sort of faded away in the phone world. But we remain convinced that users would want to access media content in a variety of ways, whether or not they had a network connection. And we believe that the cable industry would be the next logical target for that kind of content disruption. So keep in mind, at the time, OTT services weren't a thing at all, and the only real players in the video space were large cable providers. So we kind of refocused our overall business strategy on getting cable content downloaded to mobile devices. Slowly, the industry moved forward. A lot of OTT players started coming into the fore, and the industry merged into an environment where download is just a must-have feature because everyone wants it. Netflix originally said it's not going to be a thing for us, and we don't think anyone would want it. And then a year later reversed, saying, hey, we're going to charge our subscribers more because everyone wants it and we have to be able to support it. So the industry has moved into a place where download is an incredibly important feature for the user experience, and Panthera has been focused on how best to do download for the best possible user experience for years now. So, that said, our flagship thing that we offer the industry is what I generally call basic download, which is what everyone has to have these days. The concept that you're going to press a download button, you're going to get some progress and feedback as the video download happens, and eventually you'll see a completion and be able to play it when your device is offline. But we have a bunch of other things that we offer that is based around that technology as well, and we can kind of go into that as we sort of continue in the discussion.
Fantastic. And it's really interesting, right? So a lot of the, you say disconnected world, and obviously we're still largely connected, even when we're flying. I mean, even internationally. So I've taken a couple international trips lately, and they've had, satellite-based Wi-Fi access. But the streaming experience is relatively bad. And not only that, but usually you're locked into content that's available on that network. So it doesn't surprise me that more and more people are wanting this service. I mean, it's, fantastic to be able to get the content you want, put it on your device, and be able to watch it, when you want, regardless of being connected. But, obviously, this kind of offerings, kind of consumer offering, is not without technical considerations. So I would think that it would be difficult not only to manage storage and download and availability and security and all that stuff. So in your opinion and your experience, what are some of those key technical considerations that a video distributor or a content owner should keep in mind when considering whether or not to enable a download to go service?
So I think you hit it on the head with the last bit of your statement, that these are technical considerations, but not necessarily technical difficulties. So in our experience, the biggest challenge when it comes to rolling out a download feature is an understanding of how your customers expect the user experience to be. And depending on who you are and what kind of media company you are, that can mean a lot of different things. So, I mean, as you mentioned, there's a question of disk limits. Do you allow people to download unlimited? Do you give them options to stop downloading after a certain amount of space has been used? Do you set defaults and just let them change things over time? What kind of quality levels do you offer? Do you allow them to download over cellular and Wi-Fi, or only via Wi-Fi? There's a lot of considerations in terms of what options you make available to users, what options you choose to have defaulted, in sort of the overall experience. In addition to that, beyond just the basic download button, do you offer the users the ability to view a download queue? Do you allow them to rearrange the priorities of their downloads? These are questions that are user experience related, but not necessarily technically challenging. But they're things that need to be thought of well before you start the implementation process. And these are things that we've experienced with all of our customers over time. And so we provide options to let you choose to make as many of those or as few of those as available to the users as you want.
I mean, that makes total sense. And, I guess it's interesting to think about sort of the relationship of this kind of functionality with streaming. So obviously there's, you've got technical consideration when it comes to building your network for, providing streaming video. And so, are there network things that you have to do, increase your cache size or, put storage closer to the edge when you have download to go functionality?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of technical considerations from a network standpoint. The first is when you're streaming a video, the player is asking for content in a relatively slow fashion. So the players usually cache forward video content during a streaming session about 10 to 15 seconds at a time. Now, when you're going to download, you want to download as fast as possible. So you could be requesting, potentially 20 to 30 segments simultaneously, let alone, how far forward you're going. And you're going to do that as fast as you can download them over and over and over again. So the CDN and the origin systems need to be built to be able to handle that load when the mobile clients kind of put the pedal to the metal. At the same time, the content encodings that you use for video can greatly impact your download performance. And there's trade-offs, obviously. So what might be the best encoding for streaming and give good versatility in terms of switching bandwidth and giving fast changes to bandwidth conditions might cause downloads to go slower because of network overhead. So sometimes, it depends on where you are in the process. If you have the ability to take some of the encoding questions into consideration before you launch, those are things that we've experienced a lot and can provide guidance on in terms of what makes the most sense, both for streaming and for download.
Okay. Are there other considerations, the beyond technical, just thinking about things like security. So let's say you're a video distributor, you've got a bunch of, premium Hollywood content. How do the studios, how do the content owners, how do they feel about download to go services with their content? And are they requiring, video distributors to implement any different things that they normally would just for this kind of functionality?
So yes and no. For premium content, DRM is almost universally required in order to generally even stream the content, let alone download it. The good news is that there have been several standard DRM providers that function in an offline context for many years. So the most standard ones, for iOS are Apple's FairPlay, and for Android is Google's Widevine. And there's a few others that are at play in the industry. From a download perspective, downloaded video doesn't work any differently from a security perspective as the streaming video does. So if the technology, the DRM system that you're using supports offline playback, then the video is as secure as it is in the streaming context when it's downloaded.
Okay, I mean that makes total sense. So let's follow on that question a little bit. So one of the things that's interesting that I see in the market is this sort of hypersensitivity to bandwidth, especially from a user perspective, right? It's they've got data caps and things like that, both on carrier networks, MSOs, terrestrial networks, and on wireless. How does that play into consideration when thinking about launching a service, especially as you've got like 5G coming out? How is all that going to sort of impact the consumer, not only the consumer desire for these kinds of services, but the appetite for video distributors and content owners to be willing to or to be willing to charge more to enable this kind of functionality?
Sure. I mean, so there's a number of different things to sort of unpack in that discussion. We can go ahead and hit 5G first. A lot of people have been asking us, well, 5G is rolling out. Is that going to obviate the need for download? Are we going to have, suddenly this ubiquitous wireless network that's ultra fast with low latency, and you're not going to need to worry about offline playback because we're always going to be connected, which has always been the grand vision. But the reality is that 5G isn't going to be accessible broadly for many, many years yet. And even the early 5G rollouts are going to be focused on urban areas only. 5G is a great technology, but its range is much, much shorter than the existing 4G, which means we're going to have a lot of sort of disparate connected zones. A device is going to be going in and out of 5G, moving back to LTE, moving back into Wi-Fi at home. And that's just going to be sort of the state of the world. Now, what that means is that download is even more important, because when I have access to a great 5G network that can give me this super fast bandwidth, I need to be able to use a download solution that can maximize the use of that bandwidth to get the content I want on my phone as fast as possible before I leave that environment and go into a subway, an airplane, or any of a dozen other places that won't have 5G connectivity. Now, in terms of some of the other considerations, we're getting to an increasingly video and data heavy world. Video is only becoming heftier the more we move from SD content to HD to 4K. Now we're starting to roll out 8K content. So there's going to be not only more people watching video on mobile devices, but bigger and higher resolution video streams that need to be consumed. So From a download perspective, really what you need to focus on is the metrics of, how much data can I get to my device in as short a time as possible to maximize the time that I have those connections available.
Okay, I mean, that does make total sense. I think that people are looking at 5G as sort of this panacea, right? It's going to solve all of our connectivity problems, but but again, really, so what happens when you're a consumer and you've got a 5G phone and you hit a non-5G area and you can't stream as well anymore and you can't watch your content and you're kind of wishing, boy, it would be great if I had downloaded this before I went on this trip. So it's, just very interesting to think about the fact that I think, many in the streaming industry think of, it's just streaming when really it's not. It's really about consumption, and there are lots of different ways for consumers and users to consume content. With that said, though, obviously this kind of service is very user-driven, right? The user has to click on a content asset to download it. But do you think there's an opportunity to be more intelligent about it, right? Can there be an application of, and I hate to say the buzzword, but AI or machine learning, that maybe proactively downloads content that the user might be interested in, maybe in off times, so obviously it's filling in the troughs of, of the network utilization peak. So I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, the concept of basic download that everyone understands is that, user-driven, click the button, it does what we ask it to kind of function. But we've been investigating, and others have been investigating a better user experience beyond just a user-driven feature. So Netflix recently came out with a function that they call smart downloads, which uses some level of pseudo prediction to keep downloading things in the future so that you always have a cache of things to watch. Now, Netflix is a release everything up front, everything is VOD kind of company. So they have a relatively easy feature to roll out in that regard. We offer a feature that we call subscriptions that supports that exact use case, but also allows you to register a future intent to watch something. So as new episodes come out and get added to the content feeds, the devices are notified that new content is available and automatically download. Now, to some extent, that's not automatic. It's sort of the user requesting a future intent to watch or a future intent to download. Other companies have trialed artificial intelligence mechanisms to do that sort of thing. Amazon released a feature with their Kindle devices quite a few years ago that would use their recommendations engine to automatically download videos to Kindle devices. The idea being that they were always going to have content that you wanted to watch available. By and large, it really made users angry, and they turned the feature off because the Kindles were always filled up 100% with videos they didn't want to watch. Verizon also tried something like that, where they would automatically download predicted videos to your device, but if you wanted to watch them, if they downloaded something you found interesting, you had to pay a fee to basically activate the rental to watch this premium content, which was also pretty much, that was a very short-lived experiment. I think there's certainly a future for a good AI, a good recommendation system that's capable of not only predicting what a user wants to watch, but also what a user wants to download. And that could be very powerful, but no one's quite done it right yet.
I mean, and that makes sense, but, it actually sort of begs a larger question. Is download to go functionality really just, sort of dumb storage? Like it's, hey, I've got this feature in my video playback app, in my Netflix app, my Hulu app or whatever. And I'm really just, apportioning some part of my device storage to hold video assets. Is there an opportunity to maybe combine that kind of functionality on the device with things like compute or other services that maybe provide more advanced functionality? I know this is kind of a crazy forward-looking question, but your thoughts would be very interesting.
So, I mean, I think there certainly is some opportunity for some, in near future limited logic. Certainly we can monitor user behavior, and maybe we don't want to download the entire video. Maybe we want to use download and some creative predictions to drive a better streaming experience. This ties into something that Panthera offers called Fast Play. The idea being, if we can identify a video that a user is likely to want to watch, whether it's streaming or download, and we have a reasonable assurance that they're going to want to watch it, then we can download the beginning of the video. Maybe it's the first 20 seconds, the DRM license, all the other things that are associated with starting up the video, so that when we go to play the video, when the user actually taps the play button, the video starts immediately. It reduces the question of, do I have startup buffering? Do I have breaks? Is there a delay before the play button and video rendering to the screen? And it gives the user just that much more of a seamless experience. And that's driven by, some near-term predictions of user behavior. And certainly, as we get more information into the system and start monitoring user download behavior and user, watching behavior, we can start making more intelligent associations to kind of drive knowledge about what the user is likely to download, and maybe we can do some more creative things at that point.
Well, and you brought up a very interesting point right there, which is, maybe one of the, I don't know, sort of, advanced capabilities of download to go is maybe around sort of analytics, and that got me thinking about analytics and download to go in general, right? So obviously, we know how to measure the streaming experience. Well, I say how to know how to with quotes around it. But how do analytics work when measuring the download to go experience? Is data collected from an app that's combined with streaming data? So you get like this combination look at a user of like, their user experience for streaming was this, their user experience for watching downloaded video was this, and then that gives them a complete picture of the user experience. How do analytics work in this environment?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways you can use analytics. I mean, everyone in our industry is trying to get a picture of what's going to make the user pay the most and stay with our service and engage in our content. And certainly when the industry released DVRs, however many years ago that was, there was the realization that offering download to the DVR in the form of VOD content increased user stickiness, because a person who has 100 hours of content downloaded to my DVR at home is not likely to want to turn that DVR in and go with some other company because they lose all of that history. So I think to some degree, analytics can tell a very interesting story in terms of increased user engagement over the feature. Providing a constantly refreshing set of content via subscriptions or other automatic download mechanisms will give the users more sense of buy-in to the particular service that they're tied to, and will ideally, and I believe the analytics will bear this out, make people more likely to convert from trials to subscriptions and less likely to leave a subscription once they're there. But that's what the kind of analytics I think that really needs to be applied to the industry is, looking at what the level of conversion rate is pre and post download feature launching. Another interesting thing to look at maybe isn't necessarily like startup and rebuffering, but also the bandwidth used during download. And it's probably even more important for content providers who are also internet service providers, because they're wanting to make sure that the user has the best possible experience on their network in their home. So we can look at, is the best download experience happening when they're at home Wi-Fi, or are they occasionally getting degraded performance? And that can be used to tie into their network operations folks to make sure that their networks are functioning the best way possible.
No, that's very interesting. Let me take a little break here. So just a quick, notification to the audience. If you've got any questions that you want Josh to address or you want us to discuss, please post them in the poll tool, and we'll get those answered. So obviously, analytics is something that's near and dear to the SVA. We've produced some sort of metrics definitions that the CTA have adopted as part of their standardization efforts, and so obviously, I kind of want to press on analytics a little bit more. Maybe even getting a little tactical. But it's, thinking about, streaming, right? So with streaming, we have some sort of key metrics that I think the industry has kind of come to consensus on that they measure, right? Like rebuffering, startup time, call it, cache efficiency. So there are some things that are being measured regarding the sort of experience of providing video to a user. Obviously some of those, like you just mentioned, some of those aren't, really applicable, right? So buffering is not really applicable to download to go because the content asset is local. Do you have, just sort of off the top of your head, do you have like 2 or 3 metrics that you see, your customers using consistently to sort of measure the end user experience?
Sure. I mean, and as we sort of touched on briefly, the startup time and rebuffering is certainly applicable from a download perspective in that downloads can reduce those things for streaming. So they're
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
can help the key indicator of a streaming session. But beyond that, in terms of strictly metrics associated with downloading, certainly most people want to know how many downloads get initiated, and of those initiated downloads, how many complete. Also looking at what are the errors that happen if downloads stall out before completing, and how many downloads that start are canceled by the user prior to completion. Of those downloads that are completed, how many of them are played, and are they played in an offline or online context? And those are a lot of the kinds of questions and kinds of analytics that we provide our customers.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, those are actually very interesting metrics. I mean, I would definitely, from a video distributor perspective, understand why, they would want to know, those things. So, all right. Thinking about sort of this device, right? So you've got a mobile phone, obviously you got a smartphone now. So it's super intelligent. It's got, up to like 256 gigs of data, of storage space on it. It's a significant device, and as are all the tablets that are coming out, et cetera. And when we think about, something that you said earlier, this kind of concept of, download to go really is part of a, consumption experience, right? It's something that the user employs, which is part of the streaming service, and it's, sort of one of the ways that they can consume content within the context of subscribing to, like, let's say, an OTT provider. Obviously in streaming, the CDN and network delivery are critical, and I guess they are in download to go as well. And so, is there any way that you see maybe in the future where, the relationship of the device via something like download to go functionality to the OTT provider can sort of turn the device into sort of like an edge or a local cache, even potentially for streaming, and what would need to be done to sort of enable that kind of experience?
So interestingly enough, that exact use case is something that I've been noodling around with for years. The idea that we could potentially have devices become peer-to-peer edge nodes in a grand network.
Yeah.
Right. The problem is that the devices that we have just aren't there yet. So one of the biggest concerns that most smartphone owners have, and this will resonate with anyone who existed before the era of smartphones, is that our phones don't have a lot of battery life, and they die pretty quickly if you keep on using them actively. And back in the old days with flip phones, you could have a phone run for 7 days without charging it, but no longer. The problem is that network activity is one of the most costly battery activities you can take on a device. So enabling a system that would always allow a phone to be able to transmit data off of it becomes very costly in terms of the user experience. It will drain their battery quickly, and users won't like that, and they'll shut your system down. And the last thing we want to do is cause users to force close your app because they don't want to engage with your content.
That would be bad.
Secondarily, there's also the concern of sanitization. Most people get fairly edgy about letting some random user access anything on their device, even if it's a read-only controlled content. Realistically, you're potentially letting some stranger into your device to access stuff you have stored there. And that can be pretty concerning for a lot of people, especially in today's privacy-oriented environment. That said, I think there are some use cases where this could be interesting. One of the things that I thought about was a parent who is taking their kids on a road trip, or you've got 3 or 4 kids going with you in an airplane. It might make sense for a controlled sharing environment where the parent downloads a bunch of content for the kids to a single device and then shares that content to multiple devices in a controlled fashion to a small number of known users. And that is not an always on feature. It's a on-demand feature that the user has complete control over, not only when the network is available to do those things, but also who is connecting to the system in order to get content off of the device. And there might be some use case there, although it hasn't really resonated with the community enough to prompt further development with it yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting concept, and something I think that would actually be very interesting for consumers. I mean, just thinking about sort of your family example, right? Families on a plane, kids want to watch movies. You know, as a parent, do you let your kid access the streaming services on the plane, not knowing that you can't really control the content? And here you have an option where, no, I've downloaded 5 movies that I know my kids want to watch. I've got them shared on my device. They can access it that way. That's a very interesting use case that I could definitely see people getting behind.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of also the same concepts that some of the hard drive manufacturers have been looking at. Realistically, when you're on for instance, a car trip, you know, kids typically have hand-me-down devices that have a smaller amount of storage, that have lower power networks, and giving, you know, children's devices access to a parent's device to stream controlled content could be a cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that kind of opens the question a little bit around, and this, you know, it's kind of a quasi-technical, quasi-business question. But, you know, this idea that, you know, many OTT providers and, you know, even Netflix are starting to look at this concept of ad-supported, right? It's, you know, I've got so many million eyeballs watching my content, you know, how much money am I leaving on the table by not, you know, showing ads? So, you know, the question I have for you is really, is there any way, and I'm sure yes, I'm sure the answer to that is sure there's always a way, but is there any, you know, opportunity for video distributors to, you know, integrate advertising into those downloaded assets? You know, does it have to be stitched in prior to encoding? You know, or if, you know, you're downloading something that's like a linear broadcast on demand, like The Big Bang Theory, you're going to download, you know, 10 episodes of that on the plane ride. You know, how do you stick ads in it? How do you, you know, is there a way to do that that's not, you know, incredibly technically challenging, but you know, what are kind of, you know, some of the most likely scenarios of how that technology would work?
So in my heart, I am an engineer at my core, and the answer is always all things are possible with the proper application of budget and time. So yes, everything is possible. Interestingly, the concept of offline advertising is something that we've been focusing on at Panthera for probably going on 6 or 7 years. The challenge is not a technical one, it's a business one that amounts to whether the advertisers, the people who are paying for the advertising, are willing to accept offline impressions that get reported after the fact as a valid monetization event. And some of that comes around with questions of exactly how are these recorded. You know, the technical details need to go into it. How long can a downloaded advertisement exist before it becomes worthless? And a lot of the previous technology was focused on when I download a video, the advertisements go with that video download, and then they are there forever. And so within a relatively short period of time, they're not worth anything anymore because the advertisements are 4 or 5 days old. So one of the things that Panthera actually ended up patenting is a concept of offline advertisement refresh, where you can download the video, but over time we can selectively trim out specifically the advertisement portion of the video and pull in fresh advertisements and inject them into the downloaded video without forcing the user to have to re-download the video over and over and over again. And that allows us to keep the advertisements that are on the device fresh, potentially even keep multiple copies of multiple advertisements that can be played consecutively, so that when the user goes to play the video, they're always getting something that is reasonably recently monetizable. And that's something that's starting to gain some traction. We're working directly with the major advertising agencies to bring that into full market production. And it's something that I think you'll start seeing coming in, if not this year, potentially in the following year.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as you were talking, I was kind of thinking about, again, sort of something you had said and we've talked about prior in this webinar with this, you know, concept of download to go is just one part of the consumption experience. You know, is there an opportunity to create sort of a hybrid, you know, environment where, you know, yes, the asset is downloaded, you know, to the device, but the ads are actually inserted, you know, in a streaming fashion. So you're, you know, maybe it's a cue or a cue tone or, you know, some other, you know, SCSI signifier where, you know, the user hits this point in the video and then it fetches an ad and streams the ad and then goes back to the local asset when the ad is finished. Is that, you know, is that crazy?
Not crazy at all. In fact, it's exactly what we do if the user plays back a downloaded video while the device is online. Because at the end of the day, the advertisements themselves are relatively small compared to the larger video.
Right.
So there's not a lot of reason why we can't just go get the advertisements in an online context while playing back offline video. And then, you know, people who are in cars but are at least connected can have a full normal, you know, advertising supported video experience.
Yes, I can't believe we're talking about advertising. I feel very dirty. Just, let's let people watch content without advertising. Come on.
That's certainly where this is going.
You know, obviously probably one of the biggest challenges that people don't realize about streaming video it's becoming one of the biggest challenges is encoding. Obviously, you know, with streaming and with the multiple codec proliferation amongst different devices, you often have a video distributor with a workflow that has to support multiple codecs. So they've got multiple versions of the same movie encoded in different packages and different versions, you know, to address all of the different types of devices that may request that content. And it's, you know, it's become a pain in the butt, to say the least. Does video for download to go suffer from the same problems? You know, do video distributors have to keep in mind, you know, they have to encode multiple versions for different devices that may request it? You know, do they do sort of encoding on the fly? What are some of the, you know, I guess, common best practices, you know, that companies employ with encoding when it comes to this kind of functionality?
Sure. Well, I mean, the good news is that most companies are already doing mostly what they need to do in order to support the devices that they're delivering to anyway. And moving that video from a streaming context to a downloaded context doesn't change the device's capability to handle the codecs involved. What really becomes a consideration is when you have a whole bunch of different codecs and potentially a whole bunch of different languages with alternate audio renditions, potentially in surround sound and stereo, with potentially several different, again, codecs involved with the audio, not just the video. Does it make sense to download all of that when you are downloading a video for offline playback? And the answer is generally no. From a perspective of language, it may make sense to give the user the option. Do they want to download the English and Spanish subtitles, or do they just want English, or do they want none of it? And by turning off some of those codecs, by only downloading the supported codecs with the user's languages of choice, you reduce the size of the downloaded package and allow the downloads to happen faster for the users, which is always a good thing.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. And yeah, I didn't click there until you started answering that question. I was like, yeah, they're already encoding all of the videos. So that's interesting. All right. You know, one of the things I kind of wanted to get to, and we're, you know, sort of nearing the end of the questions that I have, is around this, you know, sort of long-term outlook. Obviously, you know, streaming is not going anywhere. And as a subset of streaming, I guess we can kind of term it that, you know, download to go is not going anywhere either. You know, the demand for both of these services, you know, is probably going to continue to increase. So, you know, what would you say is sort of the long-term outlook for consumer demand, you know, of this kind of functionality, of download to go functionality? Is it going to, you know, equal streaming? Surpass it? You know, what are your thoughts?
So I think eventually the downloaded content overall is going to surpass stream content. But that's because I think that video owners, the content owners and distributors, are going to want to get more creative in terms of how they get their users engaged in their content. So, I mean, just from the example of, existing TV series, there's a lot of bonus content that comes along with these things that's not necessarily the TV episodes themselves. You may be, having, backstage interviews. There may be previews for upcoming seasons. If you start looking at sports, there's always, summaries of games, there's roll-ups, there's interviews with individual players. And more, the drive to get users constantly engaged in the content that I own and that I'm trying to get my users to pay for, becomes a driver to get some form of automatic content delivery to them that they will then want to watch. So I think we're going to see a lot more, not only from subscriptions, from an automatic download where we can do binge watching with automatic caching of local content, as well as the sort of catch-up watching where new episodes become available and we automatically download them for you. I think we're going to start to see more and more supplemental content be delivered with the TV or the video content itself to provide the users a more rich and engaging experience so that they become fans of the content, not just watchers of an episode.
No, I mean, and that makes sense. And, again, it's sort of, I'm thinking as you're answering these questions, and I keep sort of getting drawn back to this concept of a hybrid environment where, as some assets are, some parts of an asset are local, in the user's device, downloaded, perhaps at the user's request, perhaps not. And then there are other assets which, perhaps are called during the consumption experience. So kind of like what you just said, this idea of, maybe I'm watching a replay of a sports broadcast and there's an option to sort of get, data or video or some other asset, about some element of what I'm watching. And rather than having that available locally, because, it wouldn't know necessarily that I wanted to watch it, it could request that, if I was connected, to sort of augment my my consumption experience. It's really interesting to think about sort of this hybrid environment.
Or even reverse of that. So, for instance, live sports, you can't download live TV. It's live TV. But on the other hand, a user who has registered that they are fans of a particular sports team, and they go and watch the live broadcast of this sports team playing every Sunday. Well, you have a pretty good intelligence about them wanting to watch content about this sports team. So you could automatically download, things like interviews, post-game roll-ups, things that would be of direct interest to them, so that when you detect that they're in a car, for instance, that's a feature that's available on mobile phones, you could pop up a little notification that says, "We see you're on your commute. Would you like to watch the post-game interview?" The things that you do that drive engagement with a user's experience to your content and give them something that they didn't necessarily have access to before, that's going to create the magic in the experience that keeps them coming back and keeps them subscribers.
Absolutely. Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I have a question here from the audience around, I guess we'll call it implementation complexity, right? So, the question really is kind of how hard is this, to implement? How hard is it to get download to go functionality implemented? And sort of what's the time frame? Like if I said, yes, I want to put this in my, I want to start offering this functionality to my users today, is it 90 days? Is it 180 days? When could I feasibly launch that service to the market?
So that's a funny question because from an engineering perspective, it really, really depends on the sort of skill set of the team you have. Do you have in-house development resources, or are you using third-party development resources? From a basic complexity perspective, though, we talked earlier about having a lot of business rule and requirements decisions that had to be made up front. So for the sake of argument, let's assume that all of those business rule and requirements thought processes have already been done. You've pulled the trigger and said, I want to implement and launch download now. From perspective of basic download, the ability to click on a download button and play back a video offline, Generally, you can get that working in as quick as 72 hours with a reasonably mature development team. Now, obviously, there's going to be some QA and stuff that has to go along after that before you let it go to the public. But we've seen some of our customers, come through as quickly as 1 month to launch from start to finish.
No, that's not bad. I mean, that seems like a very reasonable time frame to get this kind of functionality into the hands of users. All right, so that's all the questions I have. Perhaps Josh, you can leave us with some parting words about Panthera, about sort of what you guys have done, about download to go functionality in general. I'll kind of sort of toss it out to you. Is there any last words that you'd like to give our audience as they think about this this kind of functionality?
Sure. I mean, people have often identified Panthera as, quote, the download people, which to some extent is fair. But really, we're focused on providing the best user experience possible. At the end of the day, when you make the experience magical, then people will keep on paying you to have access to that experience. And so while we started with download, we're frequently focused on what goes next. Subscriptions are a part of that. Being able to automatically deliver content of interest is part of that. Being able to hand off playback from a DVR and then push the remainder of the video to a phone so they can continue watching it later. That's part of that. The experiences that we leave our users with are really what drives the ability to A, have us stay in business, and B, to deliver content to and meaningful experiences to users who want to access our content. So that's where we're focused and where we're going to keep on driving the industry as much as possible. And we hope that working with the people that are on the line will allow us to do that in an extremely meaningful way.
Oh, very cool. So I did get another question, and of course, so let me just ask it as they wrote it. So in an AVOD environment, there are complications with providing download. How do you handle that? I'm not quite sure what the complications specifically are, but maybe you've got some ideas about that.
Sure. I mean, so the good news from our perspective is that most of the quote unquote complications typically surround the advertising networks themselves and problems that they have to figure out. From a technology perspective, there's almost no difference from an AVOD context translating to download. We don't care what we're downloading. You point us at advertisements, you point us at video. We're going to take that from a remote source and we're going to put it on the device and we'll make it accessible. The trick becomes how you track those things. So if you think about the perspective of the advertising networks, they're managing campaigns. And those campaigns have certain commitments associated with them. So a advertiser may come in and say, I want 500,000 impressions over the course of this 14-day period. Well, when you translate that to what you take that from what is normally an immediate impression environment where I ask for an advertisement and within a reasonably short period of time, 15 minutes, those impressions are solidified, to a environment where it could be as many as 3 or 4 days before I tell you whether those impressions were fulfilled, you end up with a bit of a tracking trick. Because do I allow this advertisement to go over the number of impressions that my customer committed for, knowing that a certain percentage of them won't ever get fulfilled? Or do I undersell the campaign, knowing that I have a very hard limit on the number of impressions I'm allowed to do and still get paid for? So I think the challenge is mostly from an advertising backend network. I think that's going to be overcome by a little bit of malleability in the sort of the minds of the advertisers, realizing that if we allow the environment to change a little bit, if we accept that there are going to be some number of impressions that are not monetizable, but the bulk of them are, there's going to be the bulk of the impressions that I serve will likely come in within 24 hours, then maybe we accept that the edge cases aren't necessarily worth fussing about and that the money we get from the bulk of the main cases is what we want to drive our business. So, I mean, yes, there are challenges. They're not generally client technical challenges. They're sort of more business case challenges.
Okay. All right. Well, that is the official end of our webinar. I wanted to say thank you to everyone out there who spent the time to listen to Josh, answer some interesting questions about download to go functionality. I think what Panthera is doing is really innovative and very interesting. Again, as part of a streaming environment and ecosystem. I've had their email address on the screen the whole time, which is contact@panthera.com. So if you've got anything you want to ask Josh, or you want to reach out to the company and ask them further about, please do that. And then, of course, we'll have this webinar, the recorded version, posted on the Streaming Video Alliance website and on our YouTube channel, probably later on today or early tomorrow. But again, thank you, Josh, and thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.